Welcome to the IGES Institute Sounds of Safety podcast, where our community will be delving into a series of critical issues supporting the public sector mission space. Public sector organizations are under siege. Ransomware attacks are now more frequent and sophisticated than ever before. In this episode, our Cybersecurity Working Group dives into two recent cyber attacks that struck at the heart of our nation's courts, targeting justice systems that millions rely on each day. Returning to the host chair is Larry Zorio, chair of the Cybersecurity Working Group and Chief Information Security Officer at Mark 43. Larry leads an insightful discussion with David Slayton, Court Executive Officer and Clerk of the Court for the Superior Court of Los Angeles County, and Robert Adelardi, Chief Information Officer for the 11th Judicial Circuit Court of Florida in Miami-Dade County. Both guests bring invaluable frontline perspective from courts that have faced ransomware threats head-on and persevered. David and Robert offer a behind-the-scenes account of what it was like when ransomware disrupted core court operations. They'll recount how their teams mobilized in real time, the critical decisions made under pressure, and the practical steps every court and public sector agency can take to strengthen defenses and recovery plans. Tune in for the first-hand lessons from those who have navigated and overcome these cyber crises.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of IGES Institute Sounds of Safety podcast. This is the Cybersecurity Corner, and this is your hosts, Larry Zorio, and we have an incredible show today. We're getting into the juicy details of cybersecurity attacks. All of our past episodes have more been theoretical. We're talking about policies, procedures, frameworks, malware. But today, we're actually talking about real attacks, what happened, lessons learned, controls you can put in place, and all of those great things. We have some great guests on the show today. So I'm going to kick it off because, the anticipation's killing me here. I'm going to kick it off. We're going to do intros, and then we're going to get right into these stories. So I will just quickly start with introductions. Again, Larry Zorio. I'm the CISO for Mark 43. I am also the treasurer and board member of IGES Institute, and I'm also the Cybersecurity Working Group chair. So a lot of different things in IGES, and I play host on this show. But we're going to go around the table. We have David Slayton, who is the Court Executive Officer, Clerk of the Court, Superior Court of Los Angeles County. And we also have Robert Adelardi, who is the CIO of the 11th Judicial Circuit Court of Florida, which is in Miami-Dade County. So, guys, welcome to the show. I'm trying to do introductions for both of you, but, looking at your backgrounds, you have a lot of great accolades. So I'm just going to give you each a minute to do a better introduction of yourself. And then we're going to jump right into these stories. So David, why don't you start, please?
Thanks, Larry. Good to be here. I'm really excited about this podcast. As you said, it's nice to maybe hear a little bit about things that are going on every time I get a chance. I like to hear that. As you mentioned, I'm the CEO and clerk of the court for the Superior Court of Los Angeles County for almost 3 years. Before that, I'll talk about this a little bit. So before that, I worked for a short stint as the Vice President of Court Consulting Services for the National Center for State Courts. But before that, I spent almost a decade as the State Court Administrator in Texas, responsible for that, where I can talk about cyber attacks from there as well. I spent some time in federal court and state court, been working in the courts all of my adult life, and just really excited to be here today. So thanks for having us. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, David. And Robert.
All right, Larry and David, thank you very much. And welcome to everyone that's listening in on this podcast. Very happy to be here also. I've been CIO here for the 11th Judicial Circuit in Florida for 11 years. Before that, many years ago, I was also CIO for the court system in Puerto Rico. So it was a little bit different layout here. Been very active in the cybersecurity discussion, been very active throughout the state of Florida as chair of the cybersecurity subcommittee of the Florida Courts Technology Commission. So just adding my 2 cents of the whole discussion around cybersecurity and wanting to share some of the experiences we've had here in Miami.
That's great. And they both wanted to share their stories with me when we did a planning prep. And I said, no, no, no. I don't want to hear these because I want to be surprised just as you are, audience. So I literally said, like, these are going to be great stories. Please save them for the show. So I'm just excited as all of you are in this. And the great thing is like we're literally like spanning coast to coast here, right? Like we're talking about struggles and challenges in Los Angeles on the West Coast, and then we're talking about challenges on the East Coast in Florida. So I think this is going to be really great. And I also love the fact that you both have different roles. You're not both CIOs, you're not both CEOs. We kind of have one of each here. So I also think we're going to get different perspectives, which is going to be fantastic. So let's get right into it. And we're going to start with David. We're going to start in Los Angeles. David, I know that there have been some challenges with cybersecurity over the past couple years. When we were planning for this, it was specifically two different occasions that I think you wanted to talk about today. And let's just start from the beginning. What happened? What led up to it? Just tell us a story. And then, me and Robert will just chime in with questions and comments and what have you.
Yeah, sounds great. I always wondered what I might be famous for, and I would have preferred to have been famous for being, a CEO in the court system who has not only experienced one cyber attack, but two. I think I'm still the only court administrator who has the luck of having that. And I think my team here in LA wondered, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the reason why this happened. So I'll talk about them in order. I'll go back to 2020, May of 2020. This is when I was the state court administrator in Texas. So if you put yourself back in May of 2020, a lot was going on at that time. Obviously, just in the beginnings of the pandemic and trying to figure out how to respond. Most of our workers were working remotely at this point. Courts just trying to function. And on the morning, first Friday morning, can't remember exactly what day it was, May 7th or something along those lines, I got a call from my CIO who said, again, 7 in the morning, says, basically we're under attack. And he was on his way into the office, to sort of do the kill switch to turn everything off. And within an hour or so of that, we knew that we were the recipient of a ransomware attack. And that attack was basically a credential issue. Someone was, phishing attempt that created an issue. And ultimately, for us, what that meant was about 80% of our servers and other type of equipment, all the way up to our sort of nerve center, was impacted by that ransomware attack.
David, real quick, around those servers, were they all managed by like the city? They're all kind of on-prem, or were some like in the cloud? Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, they were all managed by the state. So
the state, sorry.
The Judicial branch in Texas has its own data center. And so for the most part, obviously there was a move to the cloud. The major impact was the on-prem servers. I don't remember the exact number of them, but several hundred that were impacted. And so, obviously the challenge there began, thinking about how do we respond? And so, the judicial branch in Texas, the state court level, but we supported all the appellate courts, the Supreme Court, the courts of appeals, all the judicial branch agencies, the statewide court website, electronic filing, all of that. And so basically immediately we just unplug everything, which is sort of the response to these things, try to disconnect to try to mitigate any further damage. But by that point, basically, as I always sort of divide this into phases, the first part is sort of the investigation phase. What happened? How did they get in? Try to figure that out. Then it's the remediation phase. How do we make sure there's going to be no further damage? Then the rebuilding phase, and then basically restoration. So sort of 4 phases, at least the way I've kind of looked at it. And for us, that initial phase was several days. And we had an outside vendor who helped us with that process. And, they were able to sort of figure out how they got in, where they went, and what damage they did. And then began to sort of do the remediation, then restoration. For the most part in Texas, we had good backups of everything. And so we lost very little. There was a little bit of loss. But of course, it impacted our primary customers, mainly the appellate courts in Texas. Thankfully, statewide e-filing in Texas, it was a cloud-based service. It was managed by a third party, and it wasn't impacted. And we were all remote, so most of our computers were not impacted because we weren't connected to the network at the time of the attack, which was nice. Bottom line is, it was a huge issue. It took us several weeks to recover from that.
David, when you talk about recovery, like those couple weeks, like are you literally down to like pen and paper for a couple weeks?
Pretty much. I mean, we had, Office 365.
So that was working.
We could use our Word documents that were encrypted because we were not, as long as you weren't connected to the network, you were good. And so actually maybe For folks who did connect to the network, it did encrypt even the Word documents. But of course, with O365, we said go back a version. So we were able to restore from there. But yeah, it was several weeks of that. I mean, I remember the appellate courts using some of the public documents that were out on the web for litigants to use. That's how we were trying to figure out what was going on in cases for a while. It was a pretty significant event.
So that would be like the impact to you and all the government itself. What about the citizens? What impact did they see or feel from all this?
I mean, the first thing is there was no txcourts.gov website. So for the first couple of days, it was basically nothing. Wow. I remember we set up a temporary website, which was like just the very basic bare bones kind of we're down kind of thing. I guess basically 12 hours later or so, we put out a press release so that the public knew what was going on. But for the most part, the attorneys, they could file their documents, but it was really no real way for them to be acted upon or seen because there wasn't a case management system that could be operated. The state court system there in Texas runs the appellate court case management system. It's built locally, built by the state there. And so that was down. There was no way to look at that. So it basically, for a period of weeks, there was kind of nothing really happening of substance. Everybody was kind of limping along as best they could, but definitely was a big impact on them. So that was a huge challenge. And I'll hit the LA one, then I'll talk about a couple of things that kind of compared. So that was May of 2020. I came to LA as a CEO in December of 2022. And I remember one of my very first meetings with our CIO was like, okay, let's talk about cybersecurity. And my perspective, which I'll continue to say, is when we get hit, how are we going to respond? Because obviously preparedness and doing everything we can is important, but I think is my message to everyone. I always try to remind everybody is it's maybe not a matter of if, but when, or at least think that way so you can be prepared. So that was my conversations with the CIO when I got to LA. And so we started to do some things and prepare. And in July of 2024, just over a year ago, again, Friday morning, 7 a.m. phone call. Just don't answer your call at Friday a.m. and 7 a.m. if you're
holidays, Friday mornings, like just stay away. Yes.
This was also the same day as the CrowdStrike situation that probably most everybody in the world dealt with.
No way. It was the same day.
But it was not related. Very interesting. It gave us a little cover for a while because, the whole world was dealing with that issue.
Yeah.
But that was the same day that we had my second ransomware attack. And in LA, just to give us a matter of scope, I think it was somewhere around 1,000, 1,100 separate servers. We're able to find it pretty quickly. But obviously, we went offline that day. We had a on-retainer cybersecurity team to basically help us respond, sort of do the investigation and all of that. And so over the weekend, began to look at that, try to figure out where to go from there. This was a brute force attack with regard to another privileged account credentials that they were able to get. And they did massive damage throughout, obviously lots of encryption. And then basically what ended up happening there was we couldn't open back up for business on Monday because, again, I'm now at a trial court and basically our team is providing, we have 582 judicial officers, 36 courthouse locations, 5,000 employees. And despite our best efforts over the weekend, obviously we weren't ready to open on Monday. So we got the Chief Justice to basically close our court on Monday because that way it sort of pauses some of the deadlines. On Tuesday, we opened with very little technology. It was sort of very interesting in this courthouse where I'm at, with the largest courthouse in the country. And people were walking around like it was like the old days, like pull out the receipt books and, trying to help people, but very little technology. Wednesday, we had restoration of our civil case management system and some of our other technologies. And then sort of as the days went on, but by day 10, after the ransomware attack, we were back fully functioning, which I'm pretty proud of. By day 5, mostly functioning, by day 10, fully functioning. And we had no data loss because we had good backups of everything there. So, challenging situations both, but
wow. 1,100 servers impacted and no data loss.
Correct. No data loss.
That is amazing. Wow.
I take it back to some of the early conversations that I had when I got here. I mean, had it happened when I first got here, we wouldn't have been able to say that because we improved our immutable backup strategy. And so I think the good thing is that was accomplished. I mean, I will tell you the biggest challenge in our second ransomware attack was, it was a big issue in the first one, but even bigger because of the size and scope of LA, is restoration. I mean, you think like, oh, we've got these backups, but then how are you going to get that backup from the cloud back down? Whenever for LA, we're talking billions of documents and other
Wow.
things that had to be restored because of that situation.
David, how did you figure out how to prioritize restoration?
Yeah, so the LA one's a great one because there were like, I don't know, so many systems, as you can imagine, that we
Yeah.
or our phone systems, just an example, they're VoIP. So,
Mhm.
and by the way, we provide services for multiple county superior courts in
Wow.
LA. We basically provide their phone system. So we shut them down too. So we went through and we basically listed all of the systems we had and the senior executive team. And I basically said, tell me what your systems are. When do you need them up? Like, what is like drop dead, have to have them? And kind of what's the impact? And then we literally went through and said, this is number one, priority 2, 3, 4. It's like, for instance,
That's great.
thankfully for us, it was July the 19th. Payroll had just run. So we knew we had several days before we needed to be back in the payroll system, but we needed, for instance, our case management systems back up because we couldn't possibly hold court without that. So kind of a prioritization. And our technology team will say that one of the best things that we did was to give them a very specific list of priorities versus restore everything. We need it all. They needed a very specific plan to sort of check through. And then they were able to look at that list and say, well, this team works on this one and this team works on that one. So they're able to triage based upon our priorities. And I really think that was beneficial in helping us get back up.
Now, do you still have that document saved? Like if it were to happen tomorrow, would you use that same list?
We have that document saved. The thing is that, things change. We're rapidly modernizing and modifying technology. I think we probably have to have that same discussion again in the midst of, what day is it? Is payroll running tomorrow versus it ran 2 days ago? So I think sometimes it might depend upon the situation, but it is important, I think, to have a list of all the systems you have. I mean, there were some of them in the midst. I learned so much during the ransomware attack because there were systems that we had. I didn't even know we had them and what they did as a CEO, but it's like, oh, well, what does that system do? And so you learn about it and then you're like, oh, okay. So, but I think, kind of going through that and having that ready in advance is an important step to take.
We will get to themes and lessons learned for the both of you because eventually we're going to get to Robert and some of the challenges he was dealing with. But I am curious on, did you use it as an opportunity? Like I always say, like never let a good crisis go to waste. You certainly dealt with a crisis. Absolutely. Those 2 weeks were just horrific for you and the team. But kudos to you. In 10 days, you were back up and running. What opportunistic decisions did you make or changes did you make because of this?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One is it gave us a great opportunity to upgrade some cybersecurity tools that we'd been looking to put in, or even some policies. Sometimes, especially in the court world, it's hard to get policies changed because there's a lot of forces pushing back against, oh, we don't want to do that. It's too difficult, or it'll impede our process to do this or that. In the midst of the recovery from a ransomware attack, no one is challenging, should we put in place processes to make us more secure? They pretty much are saying, what do I need to do? We took advantage of that. All of a sudden, people's passwords got much more difficult to remember and they changed more often, and geofencing and other things that we needed to do. Basically, those things were put in place in a way. And so I think that was one. Two, this is both in Texas and in LA, shutting down systems that we've been trying to shut down that just were legacy that we didn't need.
That's why I thought of the question, because I was like, oh, I would be shutting down like old licenses that haven't been used in 2 years. Like, let's just kill them. Yeah.
I mean, things that obviously would take months of discussion and planning and other things. But, with this incident, it doesn't take that. You're able to sort of like knock it out. And so, yeah, definitely. And then, just upgrading systems, maybe written on old code, you've got to restore it. You've got to maybe rebuild it in some way. Well, when you're bringing it back up, like it's never a time like the present to install those things that you wanted to install that you were afraid might break something. Well, put it in place and see if it broke it or not, because it was already broken. So I absolutely think that was, in both incidents, a really important, again, opportunity in the midst of the crisis to really bolster all those things.
Yeah, that's great. I just want to end your story with, again, kudos to you and your technology teams for getting you back up and running in 10 days. I think that's just incredible. With the sheer amount of servers you were dealing with, that's bravo to the LA County team. Absolutely.
Thanks very much. It was as you can imagine, a huge team effort. And we even had help. This is sort of like the court community, the way we work. We had, in a sense, volunteers from other counties who were over here helping us. And so,
That's great.
I had so many people reach out and say, hey, we've got a couple of infrastructure folks that can come over and help you. Do you need them? And we were like, yeah. So it was a huge effort. And the resilience of our team and our staff and our judicial officers is just sort of one of those things I look back on. And you see in the midst of that, kind of the best in everyone. We know what our mission and purpose for being here is. And like that just came out. You walk around the courthouse that day on Tuesday where there was no technology and people were out in the halls smiling, like helping people out, even though I don't know your case number, but I'm happy to try to help you as best I can. And it was just pretty remarkable to watch. And I'm not asking for a third, let me be clear, but
yeah, geez. I know it's like a cat with 9 lives. How many lives does the CEO have? Yeah, no, you're good with the 2. Please, everybody knock on wood for David. Robert, let's move on to you. But before we get into it, David just described 2 major incidents, right? And for the audience listening, like, yeah, these are the type of incidents that definitely grab the headlines. The type of incidents that make it on the local news, or they make it on CNN. Who knows, depending on how major they are, right? So these are the ones that you typically see. But you might be sitting listening being like, well, one of these big ones is never going to happen to me. And I think that's why we wanted to talk to Robert, because at least the last time we caught up, Robert, unless you have a surprise for us today, but the last time, your view or what you wanted to talk about is less around the major incident and more around day-to-day. The audience, you are dealing with this today. You are. There is something going on your network that if you're not paying attention, like it is happening. There are phishing attacks. Phishing emails get through. These things do happen. And I think, Robert, this is what we want to get into with you is I think you're going to bring up some great examples of the day-to-day cybersecurity challenges that each and every one of us are facing. And it's overwhelming. We don't have the resources for it. And how can we get creative on putting controls in place? So with that being said, Robert, let's talk about what you're dealing with.
Awesome. So it's interesting that, David, you mentioned that, which is something that's repeated often. It's not when, it's, like that famous thing, but I take it to the next level because people say it's not if, it's when, and I take it to the next level. And I say, well, let's think that they are already in your network and it's when are they going to pull the trigger? Because it's like we collectively do not even know what's going on unless you're nitpicking your network and you have the resources. So at least in my case, I have to assume that they're already in and what controls are in place to maintain and control them and box them in to do the least amount of damage possible.
Robert, before you go, like audience, you've probably heard this buzzword called zero trust. It's been a cybersecurity term that people have been throwing around for the past couple of years. Our tool follows zero trust. Our company follows zero trust. What Robert just said is literally like one of the core tenets of zero trust is assuming a breach. Assume that you're breached right now, and how can you lessen the impact of it? So just keep that in mind. So Robert, thank you. Sorry, I just needed to.
Oh, no. Actually, at the end, I have a question for David about the whole situation. But the example I'm going to provide now is when you look at what occurred, it's small, contained, a simple attack, breach. But then what could have this evolved into is what we have to also discuss. So we have in our jurisdiction, we have vendors that are managing our infrastructure for court reporting. So we have in the courtroom, we have a court reporting platform, but instead of having court employees, we contract that out to 2 or 3 different companies. They come in with their resources and they operate our computers and create the court record. So these computers, again, they're under our control, connected to our domain with our security, literally 12:05 any given day of the week. 12:05 p.m., I get a call. We have an incident in courtroom so in this building. There was a breach, and we've contained it into only that computer. My team starts doing a little forensics on it. We noticed that there was malware that was downloaded onto the computer. There was a browser session going in and out. There was a Teams session happening at the same time. Did they come in through Teams? Did they come in through the browser? How did that happen? Eventually, we also have a managed services security partner on retainer. So in addition to our own forensics, we bring them in and they start looking at what was going on. And they were able to determine eventually, a couple of days later, they did all the forensics. We provided everything they needed. They came back with, for those of you that have been following it, it's called click, fix, attack. Very simple. It was basically, the way it happened was the operator for that computer had visited a site that was compromised. There was an attorney's website, WordPress website that had been not patched properly. So the attorney's website was breached. Anyone that visited that website was getting attacked. The way it happened was, all of a sudden, the user who had received training, but obviously not the proper training, received this CAPTCHA image, right? So we deal with these CAPTCHA every day. So the CAPTCHA usually is click on all the images. No matter how well you click on them, you're always going to get it wrong.
So true.
So what happened was, we are used to that. Or the other CAPTCHA is, you have these squiggly lines and characters and numbers, and you have to tell them this is the combination, right? Well, this was interesting. Anyone that has used the computer, that has any type of knowledge, will pick this up real simple. The CAPTCHA was, that website had downloaded code into the computer's, not notepad, but into the computer's buffer. So the CAPTCHA was, hit Windows, type CMD, and click on Control V.
No.
Yes. And the operator of that computer did exactly that. So command line, Control V, which is paste, enter. And that's how the remote code was executed.
Wow.
And, proper training. So you see the simple things. You can invest all the money you want in the world in technology, and the weakest link, which is usually the end user, that piece of hardware behind the keyboard is usually the weakest link, actually did that. CMD, Control V, enter. It executed, it initiated that call out. Now, the good thing is, again, because you have the correct processes in place, you have the correct technology, that onion, the famous onion, the layered security that we talk about, it was picked up by the endpoint. So there were two things that happened at the same time. The endpoint protection picked it up, took that computer, disabled it from the rest of the network, it quarantined that computer. So there was no escalation of privileges. Again, by design, you designed this whole thing about access and security and not having administrator rights on the computers and so forth and stuff like that. So it was contained within that computer. We had no lateral movement. We had no escalation of privileges. We didn't even want to clean out that computer. We took the hard drive, we threw it away. We, pop in another hard drive, reconfigure it. Next day, it was up and running. So we provided the hard drive to forensics, law enforcement, the usual suspects.
So around that story, this was an actual contractor. Did you have any difficulties getting the contractor or even the contractor's company to agree for you to retrain them?
So no, that was part of the remediation. With every incident that happens, if the incident requires an incident response plan to be activated, part of the remediation is, okay, if training is needed, if technology, if changing the policy, whatever. And the last step is always baking that into your operations. So, you have that nice circle of whatever you learned at the end, how are you going to bake it into your current processes to make security a little bit tighter? So yes, we had to work with our vendor. We were able to retrain the vendor. They were all of the vendors we have, they were very receptive of that training. So several things happened. There were changes in operation. We looked at them. We said, you know what? These computers could be left unattended in a courtroom. Let's lock down instead of half an hour, let's say 10 minutes. If they're unattended 10 minutes, let's lock it down. Let's do that. We found out several things that, like David was saying, we could have done before that required a lot of, are you okay with this? And asking for permission, asking for opinions. No, when something happens, the best thing is take control of the situation, implement the changes you've always wanted. Then you can say it's because of this. Right. And you have a reason to implement all those changes. These are things we get, a user clicking on a website that has an ad. And then when they go to the ad that, one of these drive-by, we have that every day, but it's having the controls in place to minimize damage. So it's having the right policies, it's training the users. Whenever we have these incidents, what I do is immediately I create a document that's shared with all users in the organization, and step by step with screenshots, and you just add to your library of documents that you share with your end users for their training.
Yeah. David, what does your security team look like? What's the size of it? What's the makeup of it? The audience might be thinking kind of that, trying to compare them to maybe what you have.
Yeah, this will be a little bit shocking, but prior to our attack in 2024 in LA, well, let me go back to early 2024.
Mm,
We had one person who was doing this work for the court. And then about 6 weeks before our July attack, we hired a CISO, deputy
okay.
CIO. So welcome to the job, I guess.
Yeah.
Since then, we've expanded the team. I may get this wrong, so if someone looks at it, it's probably 8 to 10 people now that's
Okay.
their
8 to 10.
out of
And
a staff of 5,000. So, let's,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. And then Robert, like, what does it look like for you?
Well, let's say it's small and it's smaller than David's. I usually don't like giving out information. I
Okay,
never
it's
share
smaller.
sizes, teams,
Okay.
what technology we use, what products. I usually don't share that unless it's a need to know. But it is far smaller than David's.
Okay. You kind of like went the direction I was kind of because I kind of figured David had a bigger team than you, right? It's LA, right? It's LA.
But it's interesting what David was saying that
Yeah.
prior to these events, it was a very
Yeah.
limited team.
Mm-hmm. For the audience, right? Like David has a team of 8 to 10, but Robert's dealing with a lot smaller. But he's also been bringing up some kind of good controls and proactiveness. And I think what I'm trying to get to is like, yes, we would all love big cyber teams, but there are a lot of proactive things that you can do even if you don't have a large team
Mhm.
that you
Yeah.
could put in place. So
Can I just add that point? So I mentioned we brought on a cybersecurity officer at the highest level of the court 6 weeks before the attack. And one of the things that was sort of interesting, I felt like there might have been, as I call them, the bad guys were listening in my office. So this happened on Friday. On Monday of that week, I had approved an entire cybersecurity robust plan to expand our cybersecurity. So like we knew all the tools we were putting in place. Like literally, I was like, are they listening? Because they knew we were about to do all this stuff. And our attack, we of course had whatever the right terminology is. I'm probably getting this wrong as the non-tech person, but like our antivirus system.
yeah, your malware and virus protections.
But we had that installed, obviously. The version that we had, this was a new indicator of compromise. And so
0 day.
no, we gave it to them, but the one we had did not capture it. We had just installed on that Monday a new endpoint protection system, which I won't mention, just not to mention specific vendors. But on Monday, we had done that, but we'd only installed it on 100 computers just to try to see, like, oh, let's test it out. Well, guess what? Those 100 detected it and stopped it. The one we had on every other computer detected it. They were like, oh, give us 2 more weeks, we'd have been good to go. So I think, it's just, to your point, to me, it's like just constantly be moving forward in this area. I didn't need 8 staff or 10 staff to do that. We were just sort of making progress with one staff person in place.
Yeah. I'd love to kind of get both of your opinions on this too. And David, I'll start with you because you're the one that mentioned it. Like you had this plan in place, and if it just happened like a Monday later or like 1 week later, a lot of this would have been in place. So how did you and your team go about building that plan? Did you use any frameworks? Did you use any audits? And then Robert, same question for you too on kind of how you do your planning.
Yeah, again, not the technology person for sure in here, but I think, isn't it the NIST framework? Isn't that the one?
NIST, sure.
So we use NIST framework, and then there's another framework that we use. And so our CISO, when he brought to me the plan for how we should move forward, basically he had gathered information over the 6 weeks he had been here, either through reviewing policies, reviewing practices, reviewing interviews, and basically said, this is kind of where we're at. In order to get where we want to go, this is what we need to do. And by the way, as a CEO, super helpful. I would encourage any CIO out there or cybersecurity individual to do the same thing, because it helped me to sort of have a visual of like, okay, if this is where we're at in the level of maturity, so to speak, and this is where we want to go and why we want to go there. So that was it. It was really using that framework to help us figure out where we go. And we're still working down that framework. How can we get to sort of the gold standard that we want to be using that framework?
Yep. Great. Robert?
Definitely. I think it's an iterative process where you start with low-hanging fruits, and then you start building upon it using this. The problem is it's complex for smaller organizations. Then you have your CIS controls are a little bit easier to digest than for a small shop. But it is, again, it's things that make sense, things that are, again, let's take the low-hanging fruit and let's build from there. Now, David, you mentioned something that I had a question about before, and now you've mentioned another angle to it. During any of the forensics afterwards, was it determined how long the bad guys were lurking inside the system before they actually pulled the trigger?
Yeah, and I don't remember the exact, but bottom line is they've been in for a while.
Because You mentioned how they must have been hearing, or like if they were present in those discussions, they were probably present in those discussions. And one of the things that we have tight control of is automatic notification if someone's email is forwarded to another person, even if it's inside the organization. Our network administrators receive a notification because, first of all, we would need to control these things. Is information being leaked out? And because I'm paranoid by nature. So it's like, in case of an emergency, I'm not going to use my infrastructure to communicate. It's like, okay, we're going old school. We're meeting in a physical, everyone hands on deck. I can do that because, again, I'm a small organization. Everyone lives in the same county. I can only imagine, like in Texas, statewide, you have resources all over the place. But we're not going to be using our regular communication channels to be talking about the incident that we're trying to mitigate. That's something that, again, paranoid by nature.
Yeah, the point I want to make around frameworks, and we did a whole series around this, like for the audience, don't be afraid of an audit coming in. Whether it's a state auditor is going to come in and do some checks, or it could be even federal, like the FBI with CJIS, they come in and they do their audits. Take advantage of vendors who are willing to do like a gap assessment for you. These are all third-party assessments of your network, of your environment, of your policies, of the controls you have. And you can use it to build your program for the next 2, 3, 5 years. And the other great thing is you can use it to get budget. Sometimes it's hard for us as technology leaders to go to bat and try to get budget for whatever security controls that we have. But when you have a third party coming in, you have an auditor coming in saying that, oh, your access management is a little lacking. You really need to have some sort of multi-factor authentication in place. And geez, well, I've been asking for MFA for 2 years and it hasn't gotten approved. I'm now going to use the auditor. I'm going to use them. Hey, the auditor said we got to be doing this to get to a certain maturity level. So that part of it. And then the framework, David kind of said it at the end there where they're like constantly working towards maturity. Once you have a framework, like definitely measure your maturity and say to leadership, like today out of a 5, we are a 2. Yeah. And we have a goal in the next 24 months just to get to 3. Are we all comfortable with 3, everybody? Everybody's shaking their hand. Yes. Once you get to 3, then you can revisit it. Do we want to try to get to 4? Do we want to try to get to 5? So use these tools, use these audits, use these gap assessments, use it all to your disposal, and don't be afraid of it. Don't shy away from it.
Just as the CEO on the podcast here, I can't reinforce that enough. I mean, I don't know enough sitting in my chair as CEO to know where we're at. I'm not touching these things directly. And so I love all my IT friends, but you're always wanting more money for something, right? And so, as does everyone else. And so we as CEOs oftentimes have to make hard choices. And so if you just come in and say, I need more money for cybersecurity, I'm like, yeah, go away. So everybody else. But if you come in and have an audit that says, look, this is where we are vulnerable and this is where we're not, and this is how we get to where we want to go, all of a sudden this conversation is very different because I can tangibly see, okay, yes or no to this and that. Or it might not even be money. To your point, it might be MFA. Like, oh, it's just too much trouble to ask all the judges to have to use MFA. And then you come in and say, okay, here's the audit finding. Here's where that fits on the framework. All of a sudden, it's a totally different discussion. So I can't reinforce that enough as a CEO, how important that is for CIOs to present that information to your CEOs and judges.
David. Robert.
And I want to add, as a CIO, embrace your auditor. Yesterday, we were dealing with 4 different audits at the same time and 3 audits from our Inspector General for the Florida Supreme Court. I love them because what they do is exactly what you were talking about, David. They point out those gaps, and then I can work with my leadership and say, look, we have these findings in the audit. This is what we need to be able to be compliant, because an audit is going to, especially when it's an audit from your Supreme Court, you're going to get dinged. And it's all about image. On your watch, you don't want to be singled out. So all of a sudden, money appears out of nowhere.
Yes, it's a good thing. Embrace it, everybody. I actually have one final question that I meant to ask a while ago, and then we're going to get to the wrap up because we're going to close this out in a minute. So you guys have each experienced different levels of breaches of cyber attacks. We have the day-to-day. We have more of the catastrophic ones. Do your teams do any tabletop exercises where they're kind of constantly flexing their muscles? If so, can you just talk briefly about what you do?
As a member of CTOC, which is the Port Information Technology Officers Consortia that's attached to the HIP with the National Center, we've been doing tabletop exercises across the nation with different states. And I was lucky enough to be a facilitator in one of these tabletops when they did the one for Mid-Atlantic. So I took that exercise and I localized it. I brought it back to my circuit, my jurisdiction, my little cloud in the whole universe. And I got together with my, everyone that had to be in the room was there. My chief judge, our trial court administrator, public information officer, general counsel. We had everyone that had to be in that tabletop was part of that. The takeaway was so positive. Everyone was so enthused by this because they were able to, first of all, better understand what the role of each one of them is in case of an emergency. We came away with action items. We call it the parking lot, things that we had not thought about before. You write it down on a scratch pad and then it becomes a to-do list. All of that. So we've been replicating that. So now what we did, and we did this in the most recent Court Technology Conference, we held some sessions to do tabletops in the conference, and we made it available. We branded it as Tabletop in a Box, something that can be reused by the jurisdictions and localize it and taken back to their different jurisdictions to be able to exercise. So it's definitely, you need to do tabletops.
Yes. David.
I know in Texas, we did a cyber tabletop before our issue. Here, our tabletop was real. So we didn't have a chance to exercise it before, but it's certainly in our plans. What I would just say is, I think many, if not most jurisdictions do some sort of a tabletop prepared for emergency preparedness. Make one of your scenarios about cyber. Quite frankly, you're probably at this point more likely, unless you're Robert in Florida, you're more likely to have an incident that would require your emergency response or instant response based on cyber than you are some other natural disaster. Again, in Florida, maybe a different story, but it's probably more likely that you need to know that. So I think exercising that's really important.
Yes, that's a good point. All right, so we're going to wrap it up. We got a couple minutes left, and I want to give each of you a moment to really leave the audience with one or two points, like takeaways, whether it's lesson learned or things they should be doing. And then I'm going to take the last minute and I wrote down a bunch of themes and I'll just cover them at the very end. So Robert, let's start with you. So what is one or two takeaways you want the audience to remember?
Never, and David mentioned this, never let any opportunity go to waste. In our case, it's learn from your errors, see them as learning opportunities, wrap them in at the tail end and bake them into your process of what do I have to do so this doesn't happen again. It's minimize the finger pointing and let's turn this into learning opportunities.
All right. Thank you, Robert. David, for you.
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. The first is don't let convenience ever trump security. So easy for us to say, oh my gosh, that password length or expiration or the geofencing or whatever it may be is just too difficult, or the judges aren't going to like it, or the staff are not going to like it. You just can't. So, it's never easier to do that than in the midst of a cyber attack, but you don't want to have to go through that to get there. So that's one. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I think from speaking to the CEOs out there and other administrators is you need to be asking your CIO or your equivalent these type of questions. Don't just rely upon them because you need to know the answer to these questions. So asking them, do we have MFA everywhere? What's our backup strategy? Are our backups immutable? How long would it take us to restore? Ask the hard questions because your CIO should be able to answer it. If not, he or she needs to do some homework and come back to you with those answers. But I think that's probably the other important thing I would say. And then the last thing I would say is if you go through one of these attacks and you are the CEO or you are the CIO, you need to be calm because your team, for me, both times, the thing for me was to remember, especially the second time, having been through it before, I need to be calm. I need to be the voice of reason. Don't panic because you're going to make it through this. It might be miserable, but your team doesn't need more chaos in the midst of chaos. They need a leader who's focused and calm. So those are my couple of points.
Those are great points. All right. So I wrote, don't let a good crisis go to waste, which, Robert, that's what you said. Assume a breach. We covered that, right? You have to assume a breach, everybody. Practice that zero trust. If you don't know what it is, look it up or follow We'll have some material on that. So assume breach. It has happened. One of you also brought up the point around how our users are our weakest link, right? We have all these great controls, firewalls and malware protection. But if your users are unaware of the risks, if they're not getting security training, that will be your weakest link. So I have that. I also have frameworks are good, audits are good. Make sure you're doing these, use them to your advantage. It's not a bad thing. It's not a scary thing. Use it for budget, use it for projects and all that. All right. So we are right at the end of it. That's it. And I appreciate both of you, especially your last couple points. And I want to thank David and Robert for coming on today. This is a difficult topic, and a lot of people shy away from wanting to talk about these breaches and mishaps and challenges. And I commend both of you for your willingness to come on and talk about this, because this is the only way we're all going to learn. It's the only way we're all going to get better. It's the only way we're going to mature is by learning from each other. So I truly, truly want to thank you. And I just thanks you for both coming on. I'll leave it with this. We do these episodes very regularly. Stay tuned for other ones, everybody. I think we're going to do a whole series on cyber insurance, which actually came up in our talk. So we're going to do some information on that, and there's going to be a lot more to learn. So just once again, David, Robert, thank you so much. It was great having you on the show, and I hope to talk to you many times over after this as well. So thanks, guys.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Sounds of Safety podcast. Be sure to stay connected with the IGEST Institute on LinkedIn and X, and don't forget to subscribe on Apple Music, Spotify, or your preferred podcast platform to catch future episodes. From cybersecurity to artificial intelligence and deep dives into critical national data sharing initiatives, the Sounds of Safety podcast has you covered. Until next time.